We're hearing a lot about AI and how it's going to democratize a lot of industries, including movies. And we're also, when it comes to movies, streaming, movies ending up on, websites before people have the opportunity to watch them in the theaters. So I wanted to talk about some of the challenges the movie industry is experiencing as a whole. Alicia, I wanted to start with you. What would you say is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I can only really answer as a film programmer, both theatrically and for a television station that shows classic movies. And it really is that distribution has changed dramatically. It was always changing, but the pandemic really changed it. So that idea that you used to have maybe 90 days between when you would see it in a movie theater and it would be available for rental or streaming or what have you, that window's getting smaller and smaller. And so as someone who works with theaters to show films in theaters, that can be very challenging because you have to want to make sure your audience could be in those seats when they have other availability to watch that movie. And so you have to create a really special experience to get those ticket sales. I'm also seeing a lot of kind of the middle ground falling away. So it's either really, really big films, huge films, like hundreds of millions of dollars. The kind of middle ground of like a romantic comedy that would make some money and be a success has disappeared. It's really small independent films like horror films, something like Barbarian doing so much box office, which no one predicted, or a huge film like Avengers. I'm not sure what's happening in the middle anymore. And the middle used to be a very safe place, and now it feels like a wasteland.
Cameron?
Well, the middle's also become a bit of a training ground for making bigger movies.
Right.
Filmmakers like Chloe Zhao or the Daniels or others, they always get offers to do massive movies after they've done a successful independent film. 500 Days of Summer led to, franchise movies for that filmmaker. And that's not great because those filmmakers don't get to keep making those smaller independent films that are maybe more personal to them and allow them to develop their craft as storytellers. They're suddenly involved in a massive machine. When you're making a Marvel movie or a DC movie, it's not your voice. Mostly it's not your voice. Maybe people like Taika Waititi may be exceptions to the rule.
But don't directors want that? Don't screenwriters want that?
Don't they want what?
That stage, that big stage.
Some of them do,
Yeah.
and the ones that graduate to that big stage and those massive budgets and those big movie stars and stay there, they must be happy doing it, right? But I think you lose something, absolutely.
What's that?
If you got into films to express what's in you through the medium of cinema, that's not what big franchise movies allow you to do for the most part, right? You get maybe moments of that, little glimpses, but for the most part, you're making a product that will deliver what people in offices have decided the product needs to deliver around the world, right? And it's very different.
And it's ancillary markets, whether that's a
Yes,
toy
yeah.
or a comforter set or what have you.
Theme park.
Yeah, a giant multi-million-dollar theme park.
For the history of cinema, it's always been, people have always said it's dying, for the last 100 years. I mean, you had cinema that first started out as like Nickelodeon, and there were like black and white films, and then this thing called sound came in, and it's like, oh,
It's gonna ruin
it's
everything.
gonna ruin everything. And then you got like colored film came in in the 30s, and that's gonna change everything. And then you had, you had like television that came in the 40s and 50s, that's gonna change everything. And then you had 3D. Up to the 80s, you had like, VHS and then DVDs and now, internet. Cinema, I think, is very resilient. And so the what is it, ChatGPT or
ChatGPT, yes.
GPT or, whatever it may be, I think there's a kind of fundamental feeling that we have where we want stories, we want cinema. I don't think cinema is going away. I think the way we watch cinema may change, but the fundamentals of what it is, I think will always be there.
But what I will say, I agree with you. Cinema's not going anywhere. Otherwise, what are we going to do?
Right.
But also, it's not at the center of culture anymore, and it used to be. But there was only, I think, a short window, probably between the 30s and the 40s, where it was at the center of culture. That was what defined how people communicated with each other through pop culture. But once TV came and everything else, then that changed, and Now it's gaming, it's other things that are much more at the center.
TikTok.
TikTok, yeah, social media, that's much more at the center of culture. Those things will also have their day. Those two shall pass. But, opera is still around, right? Opera used to be the thing everybody did on the weekend.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
anymore, but it's still a highly prized art form. And
theater,
so
yeah.
there can be a very long history over hundreds of years for cinema, even if it's no longer the thing everybody does.
Tom?
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, this is the episode I should just put my feet up on the table and listen to you guys chat. Because, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the change of cinema and what's happening. I've seen a lot of positive changes. What's been happening. I do love the fact that that there is more opportunity to watch more variety of film. Not that we're swamped with it, that we can't choose, but actually doors have opened from to types of cinema that I hadn't watched before. And certainly my daughter, who is only 16, is watching subtitled films. Now, maybe this is all common for you, but the idea of me at 16 watching a subtitled film was, well, you watch silent films. So.
Not at 16, though. So, I mean, I'm very happy your daughter's doing that. I think that's
so am I.
unique.
And, but I'm very concerned about this chat, and I was glad you couldn't quite get what it was called, because I don't quite get what it's called either. And I'm not even sure what it means, but to me it sounds like one massive audience survey, where people sit in a screening room and they take polls of audience to see, is this the right ending? Like change the ending of Fatal Attraction, for example.
I think that ChatGPT and all kinds of generative AI, I think, are interesting dilemmas for cinema in a way, because they are going to change the art form. They're going to change all of our lives. We're old enough to have seen a bunch of different technological changes happen. Some of them stick, some of them don't. 3D, I don't think anybody's interested in it anymore. It's still there as a kind of a money-making tool for big movies.
I can't watch 3D movies. They give me a
3D 's
headache.
exactly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
3D, it was just proven, is not going to work for everybody.
Right.
But generative AI will change things in the same way that digital visual effects change things. Right? Once Toy Story happened and all of those films that came from it, that's what made Marvel movies possible. You could not make Marvel movies without the visual effects that are possible through computer-generated imagery. The same thing with AI. It will change what movies are. We just don't know what that'll turn into yet.
I want to show you a clip of an AI project, but I wanted to give you an opportunity because you wanted to say something before.
I was just going to mention, I remember when I was going to school, the biggest concern was now people are going to make films on their iPhones, and this is going to ruin the film industry, and we're all totaled. And they did start making films on their iPhones, and some of those are really excellent films, and it got absorbed into the kind of independent storytelling that we can now do. And it seems like what we're kind of talking about is the fear of democratizing the medium, which the iPhone did. It made it affordable to make movies. And I'm not very up on ChatGPT. I'm kind of Googling it a lot and trying to figure out how is this going to take my
it by
job.
Googling it, but anyway.
But I do think that is the fear when I'm reading these articles about how evil this is, that it's going to democratize something that we want to hold precious. And the film industry, which is 120, 130 years old now, has always gone through these kinds of crises. And we've always come to artists and creators to tell us stories.
I want to come back to that point about democratizing the movie industry, but I mentioned the clip. It's a YouTube clip created by the website Curious Refuge, and it went viral for creating a Star Wars trailer in the style of Wes Anderson movie using AI. Let's take a look.
With a star-studded ensemble featuring the galaxy's most eccentric cast, the Galactic Menagerie is the most delightfully offbeat Star Wars adventure yet. Starring Timothée Chalamet, Scarlett Johansson, Edward Norton, Bill Murray, Jeff Goldblum, William Dafoe, Adrian Brody, and Owen Wilson.
Wow.
Coming to theaters this summer, may the Force be with you.
Okay, reaction. Who wants to take it?
It's cute and it's fun to watch, but it shows you exactly the limitation of artificial intelligence right now, which is that only exists because the world of Wes Anderson exists and the world of Star Wars exists.
Right.
Previously, AI cannot generate a new visual system, a new world in the way that these artists did, right? So until it can do that, until it can actually become the next Wes Anderson with an entirely original way of showing us images, it's just going to be playing with and remixing and making some kind of pastiche of what we already know from artists.
I love that. It's like remixing a great record.
That's
Right,
right. That's
exactly.
right. It's a
That's all it is.
mashup.
The record still had to exist.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also there's a movie about that since Terminator 2: Judgment Day, and
Yes.
you know that went very badly. So I kind of wonder, like, whenever I think, should I be scared of this? I don't think we'll get to that point. I think we've seen a film that showed us what could happen there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I see that, I see a cute video. I don't see cinema. You know, I don't see that as something that's going to, you know, it's generates a lot of conversation, but it's not something that I would rush out. You see it once and then it's disposable.
Yeah.
You know, I think the biggest threat from AI to storytelling, visual storytelling, I think is not so much cinema as it is TV series. So for instance, if you have season 1 of Game of Thrones, you have a body of work to work from. These stories all have this similar kind of narrative arc. What's to prevent AI in the future from doing all of the subsequent seasons? Right?
Whoa.
So that could happen.
It
But,
could.
but could it make an original film, individual film? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm in completely perplexed by all of this, and and I agree. I thought the only entertaining thing about this little clip was Owen Wilson voice coming through. But yeah, I really don't know where this is taking us, and part of me thinks, well, maybe I should embrace it in case there's some legitimacy here, and I should at least understand it. But you know what? I'm old enough that I can let some things bypass me, and this may be one of them. You know, until proven otherwise.
And you know, like we're all like living with AI now. If you ever want to, you know, buy a couch, for instance, and you go on Google, and it's like, you know, and then for the next week, all you see is
Couches.
so we're all like living with this stuff now anyway.
And we hate it.
Well, Alicia mentioned, you know, this idea that it's democratizing the film industry. What about the people, though, who have the skills, who went to school? Do you think that's going to take away from that?
Well, you know, I know some screenwriters, and they are most fearful when it comes to the writers' strike of 2023 about what the companies who own, you know, the means of distribution and making series and movies will do with AI once they can. So how much will they need screenwriters? How much will they need writers' rooms if they can begin to feed some of this information into a version of ChatGPT that can then pump out scripts? So I think that part of it is risky. There's, you know, we've certainly seen that AI can generate music. There was the Drake Weekend mashup as well, which was entirely artificially generated. I think it's only a matter of time before it can do the same thing with moving images at a very sophisticated level beyond what, you know, we just saw. So it will happen, it will come, but human beings are very resilient and resourceful and imaginative, and we'll figure out a way to respond to that too, before Skynet completely takes over.
The AI will get so powerful that it will unionize, and the studios can no longer afford the AI, and then we're back where we
We
started.
can only hope.
Is this something that you think about as a filmmaker?
No, not really. You know, I don't really see it as a threat. You know.
But what if you had an opportunity to cut costs by having, you know, an AI actor or someone do the things that take skill right now?
Look, I mean, when I first started making films, I actually made movies on film. You know what I mean? Like you had to go out and buy 35mm film or Super 8 or Super 6, whatever it may be. And then at some point it changed to, you know, digital. And it was okay at first, but then it's, you know, there's always been tools in cinema. There's always been technology in cinema. I don't think the technology has ever influenced the creative and the art. You know, it only enhances it. You know, it only helps filmmakers to do it more efficiently, more cost effectively. But I don't think any technology has ever been done to help change the creative process of of film. So I'm not too worried about it.
Cameron, you mentioned the Writers Guild strike of 2023. One of the signs that I read was saying AI hasn't experienced trauma. So, that made me laugh. But how is it gonna, how is it gonna tap into those emotions?
Well, I think it hasn't experienced trauma, but it knows what trauma is from scouring the internet. It can probably give a pretty good imitation. So that's the scary thing. I'm interested to see where this goes, and it's going to have impacts long after we're all gone. But what will also happen, in the same way as computer-generated visual effects also had a backlash reaction with cinema that was much more authentic and tangible and had the textures of, real life. And AI will generate a similar backlash. We just don't know what kind of cinema that's going to show us. But it's exciting.
Yeah, I remember just a short time ago, somebody wanted to make a movie with James Dean. They're gonna computer generate, and people are like, "Are you out of your mind?" Or like Bruce Lee. It's like, no, we don't want to see that.
Holograms.
We don't want that.
I mean, it works for music, though, the holograms.
Yeah, I guess. But I think it's a bit of a fad. Like, I don't know if there's a novelty to it, to paying a lot of money to go see your favorite dead musician in a hologram that looks like Princess Leia. I don't know how long that novelty can really last.
A hologram can't fill a stadium. Like a real artist.
Not at current concert prices.
No, all right. I wanted to switch gears a little bit. Back in 2015, seems like such a long time ago, the hashtag Oscars So White took off. And since then, we've seen movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, Moonlight, and Parasite have all won the Best Picture at the Oscars. Marvel movies are also, I think, comic book movies have always been diverse. I'm thinking of the X-Men. And TIFF has an opportunity, your program is called Every Story, which has opportunities for young, diverse filmmakers. So open-ended question, has diversity won?
What is diversity trying to win? It's not entirely clear. If you mean, is there now a wider range of stories that we can see on our screens? Yes, that's happened, and it will continue to happen. Is there now a wider range of artists who are getting opportunities, which is really what all of this has always been about, is opportunity? I would say yes, more work to be done there. But then also, these things go in cycles. Like Clement, how long was it been since you were at the Canadian Film Centre?
30 years ago.
30 years ago, and that was a new program that was developed to support filmmakers of color. There was a different phrase for us back then.
Yes.
Is it urban?
No, what was it? Multicultural?
Multicultural,
Visible minorities? It was
Yes.
something else. But we've moved on from there. But then these things happen in cycles, right? There's a wave, and then it retreats, and there's another wave, and so it's just part of the cycle.
Yeah.
Thom?
Well, there's, again, very little I can add to this. I mean, I think that, diversity seems to be, I would have never used the term winning. I don't know why. That sounds.
It sounds like problem solved. We can move on.
But again, I keep bringing up my daughter, but she's watching so many things that I never had an opportunity to see. She's watching Korean movies and other films that, I didn't have the opportunity to watch when I was a kid, unless it was a martial arts film or something like that. So yeah, I think there is more opportunities for more voices, and I think diversity does go in, not just in culturally or skin color or whatever. Diversity is in whether mental health issues and other things like that, or in trauma. They all bring something new.
I think there is more opportunity too, because Bollywood, Nollywood.
But can I ask? Do you think that's it's a controversial question? Do you think only black filmmakers are allowed to make black films, or women are?
Wait! I'm the person asking the question.
You said no.
Nice try.
What do you mean no?
No, wait. What do you think, Alicia?
It's not fair. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm going to ask what you think. I mean, you're the person who should be answering.
Look, I mean, Norman Jewison, who's my mentor,
Yes.
made one of the best black films I think ever, with In the Heat of the Night. One of my favorite films is Sounder, and that was made by a white man, Marty Ritt. So it's really, who's allowed to tell what stories is a very sort of question that I'm still trying to figure out and untangle myself.
Right.
Part of that is also what the story is telling. Like I think back to Green Book, which is a movie that was people jumped on because of perspective of what story was being told, but from Green Book is a story about the driver, and so I think that legitimized a white director telling that story. I mean, if you have problems with the film after that, but if it was from the character's name, the piano player. If it was from his perspective, then I think that changes the rules.
Yeah,
I think so much depends on where you're starting from, right? And I think, I would bring this back to the question here in Canada, which is very pressing when it comes to Indigenous filmmakers telling Indigenous stories. And Indigenous filmmakers are starting from a deficit that goes back over 100 years, right? Of being represented by non-Indigenous filmmakers, sometimes in very damaging ways that affected their lives. So if you're starting from that kind of deficit, you have a long way to go before you can talk about, everybody should be able to tell an Indigenous story, right? I think let's give it another, 100, 120 years of Indigenous filmmakers telling their stories and then see where we are.
I never thought about this when I was younger, too. I guess it's like the more you learn, you do better. But I think of like the Color Purple. It's one of my favorite movies, and that was I think there was even back then there was controversy around Steven Spielberg directing it. And when I watched I've watched that movie I don't know how many times, and I still get that same reaction. But I never thought about if he was the person to tell that story because I just loved it so much. To answer your question. In a roundabout way.
That was good.
But does that open up an opportunity for that film to be remade by someone who might be more appropriate to do
I don't know. That film should not be remade.
Yeah,
Did it?
it is being
They
remade.
just did.
Oh, I did not know.
I'm sure it'll be in TIFF in September.
I could just edit that
There
part
you
out. Well, when we talk about challenges, streaming has come up a lot because before a movie was a hit depending on how much money they made at the box office. So how do you, what makes a movie a hit now? Wow.
People talking about it. I think you can still tell when a movie is in the zeitgeist, and it's not measured just by box office dollars in actual bricks and mortar theaters anymore, but it's impressions, it is reach, it is those kinds of things. Is it big on social media? Everything Everywhere All at Once is a great example. Started as a fairly small film by independent sort of festival filmmakers, these two guys, the Daniels. But then it began to take off. It was sort of counter-programming through last summer. It was big on social media. It became something that people just kind of embraced. And then people couldn't stop talking about it. And then there was the narrative of Michelle Yeoh, and she hasn't gotten her due. She wasn't recognized. And then, Ke Huy Quan, who was in these movies from the 80s in our youth, and he had a whole journey
The Harrison
where he was
Ford movie too,
exactly, where he just couldn't find roles. And so all of these narratives, I think, help generate this narrative, this sense of popularity, and that's how you know a movie's big now, is if people are talking about it.
But Cameron, can I ask you another controversial question?
All right.
He has to answer them.
You have to answer this one though.
Wow, just me?
I'm ready.
Yeah, just you.
Right, okay.
Well, do you think people will be talking about that film in 10 years?
I think they will be, but not in the same way. In the same way that, most Best Picture Oscar winners do not stand the test of time beyond the moment that they were in, or they meet it years afterwards. Like, you can go back to almost any year's Oscar winner and compare it to the films that we're now talking about from the same year, and the Oscar winner's not the one.
That's
You know what I
interesting.
mean?
Yeah.
Nearly always, right?
We do a show called A Year in Film. So it's like a yearbook for one from the 90s, one from the 80s. And when I'm writing and producing it, the Oscar pictures, I'm always like, what is that movie? Like,
Right.
and I have to look it up. I'm like, oh, and it's always usually a hated film. Not always. Ordinary People is an exception where that seems to, in our 1980 episode, really garnered some great interviews. But it is surprising how that happens. I do think this film, I think, will eventually be very large in industry history. So when they start to write about 2022 and 2023 for textbooks down the road, I think that film will get brought up because it's for the exact reasons you're talking about. It was such an anomaly and such a magic kind of kismet that happened around that distribution that no one could have predicted.
That is so interesting what you just said, because if you were to go on Twitter anytime around the Oscars, people have very strong feelings about the movie they want to win, the actor they want to win. And then a year later, we're like,
Maybe not a year.
well, I mean, like 2 years later, it's like, that's a wrap.
we get way too exercised about what's going to win and what's not going to win, because that's not essentially the test of time for any art form.
No.
Right? You look at what paintings were popular when the Impressionists were painting, right? They weren't them. Van Gogh died in poverty. So what endures as great art is not always what's popular in the moment.
So I'll end with this, Thom. So our audience is fickle.
Oh, yeah, I do think they changed their opinions. I think I changed mine. And I also think when you watch a film, it depends on your mood or what you heard about it beforehand. I think seeing something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, if you go into it blindly, it's a revelation. It's stunning. But if you get all the press beforehand and you hear about it and you hear about how exciting it is, how different it is, then you risk being disappointed.
Because it raises the bar, or your
Raises the bar,
expectations?
absolutely, and expectations.
One quick thing on Everything Everywhere All at Once, it was edited partly using an AI tool.
Oh, no way.
Well, now I don't like
Really? You ruined it.
Oh, no.
That's really interesting.
So
This has been a great conversation. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about genres. And Thom, I thought I liked you until you said you don't like rom-coms, which is,
I don't think I said I didn't like rom-com.
Well, we're going to talk about genres and if there is one genre that does better in the movies. Thanks so much again.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.